It took her 9 years to forget that face. 9 years of waking up at 4 in the morning, making coffee, counting every penny, and telling herself she was okay. That Sophie was okay. That the man who abandoned her didn't deserve to be remembered for even a second. Then the door opened, and Dominic Moretti walked in. Not the teenager she once loved, not the man she once waited for, but something more dangerous, colder, a black suit, emotionless eyes, and a name that all of New York feared to utter. Her daughter sat right in the corner, and she was looking at him and smiling. If you enjoy stories of secrets, buried love, and irreversible choices, please like and comment the city you're watching so I know how far my story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, because what happens next will change everything. The alarm went off at 4:13 in the morning, same as always, and Delilah Hart silenced it before the second buzz, with the muscle memory of someone who had been doing this so long that waking felt less like rising and more like surrendering to the inevitable. She lay there for exactly 3 seconds. That was all she allowed herself. 3 seconds to stare at the water stain on the ceiling above her bed, that brown oval shape that had been spreading for 2 winters now, and that she still hadn't fixed because fixing things cost money, and money was the one thing she never seemed to have enough of. 3 seconds to feel the ache in her lower back from the double shift she'd pulled the day before. 3 seconds to listen to the quiet coming from Sophie's room across the hall. That particular silence that told her the kid was still asleep, still safe, still breathing. Then she got up. The apartment above Hart's Corner was small enough that she could cross from bedroom to bathroom in 6 steps, and she'd learned to do it without turning on the overhead light, because it flickered before it caught, and the flicker always woke Sophie. She brushed her teeth in the dark, pulled her hair back with a rubber band she kept on the bathroom faucet, looked at herself in the mirror for just long enough to confirm she was still there, still functional, still holding. She was 31 years old, and she looked it. That wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact she'd made her peace with somewhere around Sophie's 4th birthday, when she'd stopped waiting for her life to become something easier and started accepting it for what it was, hers. Difficult and cramped, and occasionally beautiful, and entirely, completely hers. Downstairs, the cafe was cold at that hour. Manhattan in November had a particular kind of cold that came up through the floors, through the rubber soles of her shoes, into her ankles and knees before she'd even turned on the lights. She hit the espresso machine first, always, because it took 12 minutes to come to proper temperature, and those 12 minutes were the only quiet she'd get all day. Hart's Corner occupied the ground floor of a narrow 4-story building on the intersection of 2 streets that nobody famous had ever named anything after, wedged between a dry cleaner that smelled like chemicals and a Pakistani grocery whose owner, Mr. Karimi, had been giving Sophie free mangoes every Saturday since she was 3. The cafe had 18 seats, a counter with 6 stools, and a chalkboard menu that Delilah rewrote every Monday in handwriting that had gotten increasingly illegible over the years. The walls were exposed brick. The light fixtures were Edison bulbs she'd bought secondhand. The whole place looked like someone had tried to make something warm out of materials that didn't quite cooperate, which, she'd always thought, was also a fair description of herself. She pulled the chairs down from the tables, wiped the counter, restocked the pastry case with the items she'd baked the previous night after Sophie went to bed. Blueberry scones, a coffee cake that was heavier on the brown sugar than the recipe called for, 24 chocolate croissants she'd learned to make from a YouTube tutorial at 1 in the morning 3 years ago and had been selling out of every day since. She did all of this in the near dark, in the quiet, in the 40 minutes before she had to go wake Sophie and get her ready for school and open the door for the first customer of the day. Those 40 minutes were hers. She didn't think during them. She just moved. It had taken her a long time to learn how to stop thinking. Sophie Hart woke up already talking. This was not unusual. The kid had been verbal since before she could walk, opinionated, loud in the specific way of children who have never been made to feel that their voices were a nuisance, curious about everything in a way that exhausted Delilah and filled her with a kind of fierce, helpless pride simultaneously. At 8 years old, Sophie was the sort of child who asked why approximately 40 times a day and was genuinely dissatisfied with non-answers, who had opinions about everything from the correct way to fold a napkin to the plot holes in whatever novel she was currently reading, who made friends with strangers on the subway and remembered their names afterward. She looked almost nothing like Delilah. Delilah was pale and dark-haired and built lean, all sharp angles and economy of movement. Sophie had deep olive skin and wide dark eyes, and her father's jaw, that particular strong jaw that Delilah had spent 9 years not thinking about, and a quality of stillness beneath all her energy that sometimes, in certain lights, at certain moments, turned Delilah's chest into something that ached. She didn't let herself dwell on it. "Can I come down today?" Sophie asked, already pulling on her school sweater before Delilah had finished making her bed. She asked this most mornings. The answer was almost always the same. School first. After school. Homework first. After homework. Then yes. Delilah smoothed the collar of the sweater. "You can do your reading in the corner booth. Don't bother the customers." "I never bother the customers." "You asked Mr. Patterson what his political views were." "He brought it up." "You're 8. Sophie considered this with the gravity of a much older person and then apparently decided it was not a winning argument because she picked up her backpack instead and headed for the door. "I'll have hot chocolate when I get back," she announced. Not asked, announced. "You'll have milk." "Hot chocolate." "We'll negotiate at 3:30. Delilah watched her daughter disappear down the stairs and felt the thing she always felt in those moments. That complicated mixture of love and terror that nobody had ever described adequately to her before she became a mother, the way it was nothing like the movies suggested, nothing soft or golden, but instead something almost violent in its intensity. This awareness that Sophie was the thing she would burn down entire cities to protect, and also the thing most likely to one day casually destroy her simply by existing. She stood in the doorway of Sophie's room for just a moment after the girl was gone, listening to her own breathing, and then she went back downstairs to open the cafe. The Tuesday rush was real in a way that people who had never worked a counter couldn't quite understand. It wasn't the sheer volume, Thursdays were worse for that, but something about Tuesday specifically brought in a particular category of difficult customer, people who had made it through Monday and were furious to discover that the week wasn't over yet. They wanted their coffee fast, and they wanted it right. And they wanted the person making it to understand without being told that their morning had already been a series of disappointments. Delilah was good at this. She had a talent for reading people at the counter, for knowing before they opened their mouths whether they needed to be talked to or left alone, whether the right response to a complaint was a replacement drink or an apology, or simply silence and efficiency. She'd had this skill her whole life, that ability to read rooms and people, and she'd once thought it was something she'd use for something larger than a 40-seat cafe. But largeness had turned out to be a luxury she couldn't afford, and she'd made her peace with that too. By 11, the rush had thinned. By noon, the cafe was down to the regulars. Mrs. Chen from the 3rd floor of the building across the street, who came every day and ordered green tea and never drank more than half of it. The 2 Columbia grad students who camped in the corner booth from noon to 3 and paid for 1 coffee each but never caused trouble. The retired school teacher whose name Delilah had never learned but who tipped 30% on every order like clockwork. She was restocking the napkin holders when the door opened. She didn't look up immediately. She heard the bell, that small silver bell above the door that she'd hung herself with a nail and a prayer 3 years ago. And she registered the change in air pressure, the particular quality of cold that came in from outside, and then she looked up because something made her look up, some instinct she couldn't name. The man who walked in was tall. That was the first thing. Tall enough that he had to angle his shoulders slightly coming through the doorway, a habit so automatic she could tell he'd been doing it his whole life. He was wearing a black coat, cashmere, her brain registered without her permission, cut by someone who charged more for a single garment than she made in a month. And he moved with the particular economy of a person who had never needed to hurry because things simply got out of their way. He was looking at her, not at the menu, not at the pastry case, at her. Delilah's hand stopped on the napkin holder. The recognition came in pieces, the way bad news always did. First, a wrongness, a sense of something misaligned with reality, and then the slow, terrible assembly of specifics. The jaw, the dark eyes, the way he held himself, that stillness that wasn't peace, but something harder, something practiced, The small scar below his left ear that she had once traced with her thumb in a darkened apartment 9 years ago. Dominic. The name didn't come out. Nothing came out. Her throat had closed. He crossed the cafe in 5 steps, stopped at the counter. His eyes moved over her face the way you looked at something you'd memorized and then lost and were not entirely sure was real. Delilah. His voice was the same. Lower, maybe, but the same. No, she said. The word came out before she'd made the decision to speak. I know. He said it quietly. Not an apology, not an explanation, just an acknowledgement. No, she said again, which she understood was not a coherent response, but was the only thing she was currently capable of producing, because her brain had stalled completely somewhere between recognition and rage, and something else she was not going to name. You need to leave. He didn't move. Dominic. The name felt wrong in her mouth, like using a word in a language she'd decided to stop speaking. I'm asking you to leave. I know you are. He put his hands on the counter. Bare hands, she noticed, no rings. And she made herself not look at them. I just need a minute. You had a decade. You're done with minutes. Something moved across his face at that. Something that might have been pain if she'd been willing to give him that. She wasn't. Delilah, I have customers. She didn't. The cafe was nearly empty. They both knew it. He was quiet for a moment, looked at the counter, looked back at her. I didn't know you were here, he said. I didn't come looking. I came in because it was raining and I needed... He stopped. Looked like the end of that sentence had surprised him. I don't know what I needed. Coffee, she said flatly. You need coffee. I'll make you one. And then you're going to leave and not come back. Delilah, that's the deal. He looked at her for a long moment, and she held his gaze because she had spent 9 years not looking away from difficult things, and she was not going to start now. Not for him, not for anyone. Okay, he said finally. Coffee. She turned away to make it. Her hands were shaking. She kept them below the counter so he wouldn't see. She got through the making of the coffee by thinking about inventory. She was almost out of oat milk. The espresso beans needed to be reordered by Thursday. The small refrigerator under the counter had been making a sound for the past week that she didn't like, a low rattling sound that suggested something expensive was about to break. Inventory, practical things, real things. She set the coffee in front of him without looking at his face. He slid a 20 across the counter. She made change. He didn't take it. Keep it, he said. I don't want your money. It's a tip. I don't want your tip. He left the money where it was. She left it there too because picking it up would require reaching toward him, and she was not going to do that. He drank the coffee slowly. She moved to the far end of the counter and pretended to clean the espresso machine, which she had already cleaned twice that morning. You own this place, he said. She didn't answer. It's good, the coffee. I know it is. A pause. How long have you been here? She considered not answering, decided that not answering was a kind of engagement she wasn't willing to offer. Long enough, she said. Another pause, then, you look... Don't. He stopped. The door opened and Mrs. Chen came in for her daily green tea and the normalcy of it. Mrs. Chen's small nod, the familiar order, the ritual of the transaction, was something Delilah grabbed onto like a handhold on a cliff face. She made the tea. She exchanged the usual minimal pleasantries. She felt Dominic watching her from his stool, and she did not look at him once. When Mrs. Chen settled at her usual table, Delilah came back down the counter. You should go, she said, quietly enough that Mrs. Chen wouldn't hear. Whatever brought you in here, whatever you think is going to happen, I'm not thinking anything. Then what are you doing? He looked at the coffee cup in his hands, at the counter, at her. I don't know, he said, and the honesty of it, the plainness of it, hit her somewhere she didn't want to be hit. I genuinely don't know. I saw your name on the window and I couldn't... He stopped again. Delilah's name was written in gold lettering on the window. Delilah's Heart's Corner Cafe. She'd put it up herself 3 years ago with a kit she'd bought at a hardware store, and she'd misspelled her own name the first time and had to redo the H. He'd seen her name and walked in. She didn't know what to do with that. You need to go, she said, and her voice came out flatter than she intended, scraped clean of everything. And Dominic, she waited until he looked up. Don't come back. He held her gaze, nodded once, slowly, and then stood and buttoned his coat and left without another word, the bell above the door marking his exit with the same cheerful indifference it marked everyone else's. Delilah stood at the counter for a long moment after the door closed. Then she picked up the $20 bill, folded it, and put it in the tip jar. Not because she wanted it, because throwing it away would mean it had made her feel something. She was still standing there 3 minutes later when the bell rang again, the afternoon cold rushing in from outside, and Sophie walked through the door in her school coat with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her dark eyes already scanning the cafe with that particular proprietary quality she had, that sense of someone assessing a space she considered her own. "Hi, Mama," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "How was school?" "Boring." "Who was that man?" Delilah's hands went still. "What man?" "The tall one in the black coat. He was standing outside on the sidewalk when I came around the corner. He looked at me." Sophie tilted her head with that eerie exactness she sometimes had, that way of assessing something until she understood it. "He looked at me like he knew me." The cold that moved through Delilah had nothing to do with November. "What did he do?" Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. "Nothing. He just looked at me and then he walked away." Sophie shrugged, already losing interest, already reaching for the menu she had memorized years ago. "Can I have hot chocolate now?" "Yes," Delilah said. "Sit down. I'll bring it to you." She watched her daughter slide into the corner booth, their booth, the one Sophie had claimed at age 3 and had been occupying in various configurations of books and schoolwork and elaborate drawings ever since, and she watched the way the afternoon light fell across her daughter's face, that strong jaw, those deep, dark eyes. Dominic Moretti had stood on the sidewalk outside her cafe and looked at Sophie, and Sophie had said, "He looked at me like he knew me." Delilah turned and went to make the hot chocolate. She moved carefully, precisely, because her hands were not entirely steady and she needed them to be. She thought about inventory again, about the refrigerator sound, about the espresso bean order. She thought about the birthmark on Sophie's left wrist, a small, dark crescent shape that Sophie had been born with and that Delilah had never had occasion to think much about. She thought about whether Dominic Moretti had seen it. She thought about that for a long time. That night, after Sophie was asleep and the cafe was locked and the chairs were back on the tables, Delilah sat at the counter with a glass of water and her phone and pulled up the name she had not searched in years. Dominic Moretti. The results loaded slowly and then all at once, and she scrolled through them with the controlled calm of someone who had already decided how they were going to feel about what they found. She read for 40 minutes. Then she closed the browser and put her phone face down on the counter and sat with the silence of the empty cafe around her. The boy she had loved was gone. The article she'd just read was not about a boy. It was about an organization, a network, a name that moved through certain parts of this city like weather. Unavoidable, powerful, the kind of thing you prepared for, or you got caught in. Dominic Moretti was not someone who walked into small cafes on rainy Tuesdays. Dominic Moretti was someone whose presence in a location meant something, and she did not yet know what his presence in her location meant, and that not knowing was the most frightening thing she'd encountered in years. She thought about Sophie saying he looked at me like he knew me. She thought about Sophie's wrist, and then, because she was Delilah Hart, because she had made it through 9 years of this alone and she was not going to fall apart now, she got up, rinsed her glass, turned off the light, and went upstairs to bed. She did not sleep. At 3:47 in the morning, her phone lit up on the nightstand. An unknown number, no text, just a single image. A photograph of her cafe from outside. Shot tonight, after closing. The lights off, the chairs on the tables visible through the window. And in the corner booth, just barely, just visible through the glass, the shape of a small girl bent over a book, illuminated by the glow of the light Delilah always left on for Sophie when she read late. The photograph had been taken while Sophie was still inside. Someone had been watching. Delilah didn't call the police. She thought about it for approximately 4 seconds, sitting on the edge of her bed with the phone in both hands and the photograph glowing on the screen. And then she thought about what calling the police would actually accomplish. The questions, the reports, the officers who would come and look at a photograph of the outside of her cafe and tell her it wasn't technically a crime, and meanwhile whoever had taken it would already be 3 moves ahead of any response she could generate through official channels. She deleted the message instead. Then she sat with the dark and the silence and the sound of Sophie breathing through the baby monitor she still kept on her nightstand, even though Sophie was 8 and had asked her twice to take it away. Delilah had said yes both times and then left it there. Sophie hadn't pressed. She was perceptive enough, that kid, to understand that some things her mother held on to weren't negotiable. At 4:13, the alarm went off. She silenced it and got up and went downstairs and opened the cafe. She did it because it was the only thing she knew how to do. He came back on Thursday. She'd spent Wednesday convincing herself he wouldn't. She'd built a reasonable argument around the single coffee, the way he'd nodded and left, the fact that he was a man with, if the articles she'd read were even a quarter accurate, approximately 10,000 more pressing concerns than a corner cafe run by a woman he used to know. She'd made the argument to herself in the spaces between customers, between baking and restocking and running Sophie to her Wednesday afternoon book club at the public library 2 blocks over. By Wednesday night, she'd almost believed it. Thursday at 10:30, the bell rang. Delilah was behind the counter with her back turned, running the espresso machine, and she knew before she looked. The quality of the silence that followed the bell, the way her 2 regular grad students went quiet mid-sentence, the way Mrs. Chen looked up from her green tea, told her everything. She turned around. Dominic was wearing a different coat. Dark gray this time, same cut. He had someone with him, a younger man who positioned himself near the door and stayed there, which was not how a person behaved if they were just getting coffee, which meant he was there to watch the room, which meant Dominic had come prepared for something. She did not let herself think about what that something might be. "I asked you not to come back," she said, before he reached the counter. "I know." He sat down on the stool closest to her. "I need to talk to you." "I don't have anything to say to you." "I'm not asking you to say anything. Just listen." She put both hands flat on the counter, kept her voice down, conscious of the grad students, of Mrs. Chen. "Dominic, I have a business. I have customers. I have a routine that works, and I need it to keep working. And you showing up here, someone sent you a photograph." Her mouth closed. He watched her face with those flat, dark eyes. "Tuesday night, after you closed, a photograph of the cafe." The fact that he knew this, the fact that he was sitting here in the daylight telling her calmly that he knew this, was either the most terrifying thing she'd heard in years or the second most terrifying, right after the photograph itself. "How do you know that?" she asked, and kept her voice level by main force. "Because the person who took it works for a man named Caruso. And Caruso sent it to you as a message." "I don't know anyone named Caruso." "You don't need to know him." He leaned forward slightly, not threatening, just intent. "He knows you. He knows your name, your address, your schedule. He knows..." Something moved across Dominic's face. "He knows about the girl." The cafe could have been empty at that moment, for all Delilah was aware of it. Every sensory detail narrowed down to the counter between them and the 3 feet of air above it. "Say that again," she said. "He knows about Sophie." She heard her own breathing, measured it, controlled it, because the alternative was to let what she was currently feeling out into the air, and she could not afford that. "Get up," she said. "Come around the counter." He looked at her. "Now," she said, "and tell your man by the door to stay where he is." Ooh. The kitchen behind the cafe was small and institutional. Stainless steel surfaces, a heavy commercial oven, the smell of coffee and sugar baked into every wall. Delilah closed the door behind them and turned around, and the composure she'd been holding cracked exactly once, visible for maybe 2 seconds, before she locked it back down. "Who is he?" she said. "Explain it to me simply." "Enzo Caruso. He runs the Eastern Waterfront operations. 3 weeks ago, he and I had a..." Dominic paused. "A disagreement. Over territory. Over an arrangement that was supposed to be settled 2 years ago and isn't." And his response to a disagreement with you is to photograph my cafe. His response is to find the things that matter to me and make them visible. He said it without inflection, the way you stated a fact about weather, to show me he can reach them. I don't matter to you, Delilah said. I haven't mattered to you in 9 years. We were 22, whatever we were to each other then. He doesn't know that. Then correct him. I can't correct him without confirming that I'm aware of you, which means confirming that you're worth being aware of. He was watching her with that stillness that she'd spent 9 years trying not to remember specifically, which makes you more valuable to him, not less. Delilah pressed her palms flat against the steel counter behind her. The cold of the metal went through her palms and up her wrists and helped. So what do you want? She asked. You came back here to tell me I'm in danger because of you? I came back here to tell you that I'm handling it. That's not what I asked. Delilah, what do you want, Dominic? He was quiet for a moment. She could hear the cafe sounds on the other side of the door, the espresso machine cycling down, a chair scraping, the ambient murmur of the 2 grad students resuming their conversation. I want to make sure you're safe, he said. That is not something you get to want. She kept her voice flat and precise. You don't get to walk back in here after 9 years and want things that involve me. You lost that when you left. Something in his face shifted. I know. Then why are you here? Because Caruso isn't going to stop at a photograph. She looked at him, at the scar below his ear, at the jaw she hadn't let herself look at directly since Tuesday. She thought about the photograph on her phone, the corner booth visible through the dark window. Sophie bent over a book. How long do I have? She said. I don't know. Estimate. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she remembered from a long time ago, from a version of him that no longer existed. A week, maybe 2. He's building to something, but he's careful. He'll want the advantage of timing. And what exactly are you planning to do about it? Take the leverage away. Make it clear to Caruso that you're not... He paused again. That you're not what he thinks you are. Which is... The pause was longer this time. He thinks you're important to me. Delilah said nothing for a moment. The refrigerator in the corner made its low rattling sound. She'd been meaning to call someone about that for a week, and the normalcy of it, that small mechanical complaint, steadied her somehow. You need to go, she said. Delilah. I'll handle my own security. I'll be careful. And you, she met his eyes directly. You will stay away from this cafe and away from my daughter, and you will resolve whatever this is on your end without involving us. It's not that simple. I didn't ask if it was simple. I told you what's going to happen. He looked at her for a long moment. She didn't look away. Eventually he nodded, that same single slow nod he'd given her Tuesday, and moved toward the door. Dominic. She said it without planning to. He stopped but didn't turn. Did you see her? Tuesday, when you were outside. A beat of silence. I saw a kid in a window, he said, and then he went back through the door, and she heard him move through the cafe and the bell rang over the front door, and then it was quiet. Delilah stood in the kitchen with the cold steel at her back and her eyes on the middle distance and thought about the fact that he had not actually answered her question. She started noticing things after that, small things, the kind you only caught if you were looking, and she was looking now with the specific quality of attention she'd learned in the first years of single motherhood, that hypervigilance that never fully went away once it came in, the constant low-level scan of every room for exit routes and threats and things that were wrong, the black sedan that idled at the corner for 40 minutes on Friday morning, gone before she could get a plate number. The man in the coffee-colored jacket who came in Saturday, sat for 20 minutes, ordered nothing, left. And she'd been halfway through approaching him when he got up and walked out, unhurried, like someone who'd seen what they came to see. The sensation, persistent and impossible to dismiss, of being mapped. She didn't tell Sophie. There was no version of this conversation that didn't terrify an 8-year-old, and Delilah had spent Sophie's entire life building the specific infrastructure of normalcy that let her daughter feel safe, and she was not going to dismantle it now. So she walked Sophie to school, and she picked her up at 3:30, and she made dinner and helped with homework and listened to the extended, detailed narrative of whatever drama was currently consuming Sophie's third-grade social ecosystem. And she kept her face composed and her voice even, and she did not think about black sedans in front of the house until Sophie was asleep. Then she thought about them very hard. On Sunday, she called her friend Marcus, who'd grown up 2 blocks from her in Brooklyn and now worked in building security, and she asked him, carefully, without specifics, what a person was supposed to do if they thought someone was watching their property. Cameras, Marcus said immediately. Get cameras, internal and external. You want to know what's coming before it gets to you. What if you don't have the budget? Delilah, get the cameras. His voice shifted. What's going on? Nothing. I'm just being cautious. Because of what? Because I have a kid and I run a small business, and the neighborhood's been... Dell, she stopped. You'd tell me if something was actually wrong, Marcus said. Not a question. Yes, she said, which was not entirely true, but was the only answer that would end the conversation without escalating it into something she couldn't control. I'd tell you. She ordered cameras online that night, same-day delivery. Had them up by Tuesday morning before she opened the cafe, 4 external and 2 internal, feeding to an app on her phone. It took her 4 hours and 2 broken drill bits and a level of profanity she was grateful Sophie wasn't awake to hear. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold afterward and looked at the front of the cafe. At the window where Sophie's corner booth was visible from outside. She went back in and called a glazier and asked about privacy window film. He came back on Tuesday, 8 days after the first time. 7 days after she'd told him not to. She saw him on her phone screen, the external camera, northeast angle, before he even pushed the door open, and she used the 3 seconds between spotting him and hearing the bell to decide what she was going to do. She let him sit down. She did not approach immediately. She finished making the latte she was halfway through and handed it to the woman who'd ordered it, made change, exchanged the brief impersonal pleasantries of the transaction, and then walked down to where Dominic was sitting. You have 2 minutes, she said. Caruso's moving faster than I thought. She kept her face still. Tell me. He's made contact with 2 of my associates, asking questions about you. Specifically, he lowered his voice, and the drop in volume made the next part worse somehow. Specifically about whether you have a child. Everything in Delilah went cold and quiet in the specific way it did when she shifted from feeling something to managing it. How do you know this? She said. Because I still have people who tell me things. He had both hands around a coffee cup she'd apparently put in front of him on autopilot, though she had no memory of doing it. He's not asking idly. He's building leverage. He wants something specific. What does he want? He wants me to give up the Eastern waterfront arrangement. Walk away from 2 years of infrastructure. Let him take it without consequence. And you said no. Dominic looked at her levelly. I said no. So he's going to use my daughter. She said it plainly, the same way she talked about inventory or scheduling, because that was the only way she could currently say it at all. He's going to take my daughter and use her to make you fold. That is what I'm trying to prevent. By coming here. She set her hands flat on the counter. By sitting in my cafe and having this conversation out loud where anyone can see us, which only confirms to whoever's watching that I matter to you. She watched his face. You're making it worse. He opened his mouth and then closed it. You know I'm right, she said. If I walk away from you completely, you're unprotected. If you sit here talking to me, you're painting a target on me and Sophie. Which is worse, Dominic? Which outcome is worse? He was quiet for a moment that felt very long. I can put people on the building, he said. Absolutely not. Delilah, I said no. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not letting your people anywhere near my daughter. I don't know your people. I don't know what they are or what they do or how far their loyalty to you extends before it stops. You understand me? His jaw was tight. Then what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you fix this. She straightened. On your end, away from here. You go handle Enzo Caruso and you do it fast and you keep his attention on you and away from this street. And in the meantime, I take care of my own. He looked at her with something she refused to identify as respect. You're serious. I've been serious since Sophie was born. She picked up his untouched coffee cup and set it back down further away. I've been serious about everything for 8 years without any help from you. I think I can manage the next 2 weeks. He held her gaze for a long moment and then nodded. Got up, buttoned his coat, reached for his wallet. Keep it, she said. He stopped. I don't want your money, and I don't want you sitting at my counter. Take Caruso apart and leave us out of it. That's all I'm asking. He looked at her one more time, one long look she couldn't fully decode, and then he left. Delilah turned back to the espresso machine, gripped the portafilter until the edge of it bit into her palm, and the small physical pain cleared her head. She had the cameras. She had Marcus on speed dial. She was going to be fine. She was going to keep Sophie fine. She almost believed it. Sophie got home at 3:30 with a drawing she'd done in art class. A house, some trees, a woman behind a counter that was clearly meant to be Delilah, and next to the woman, a tall figure in dark colors that Sophie had rendered with the careful, serious attention she gave to everything. Delilah looked at the drawing for a long moment. Who's this? She asked, keeping her voice light. Sophie looked at the figure. I don't know, she said. I just put him there. It felt like he was supposed to be there. That night, at 10:47, Delilah's camera app sent an alert. She grabbed her phone. Northeast exterior camera. A man she didn't recognize, standing on the opposite sidewalk, looking directly up at the cafe. Just standing, not moving. She was still watching when a second alert fired. Southwest camera, another man, same posture, same stillness. 2 of them, both angles, simultaneously. She called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. I need you to come stay at my place, she said. Tonight, bring whatever you bring when something is actually wrong. A beat of silence. I'm on my way, he said. She hung up and went to the base of the stairs and stood there listening to the particular sound of Sophie sleeping. The small, unconscious sounds of a child who believed the world around her was safe, and the terror she had been managing since Tuesday sharpened into something colder and more precise. She went to the counter, picked up her phone, pulled up the contact she'd put in after Dominic's second visit, the one she'd labeled with a single letter because labeling it with his name felt like a concession she wasn't ready to make. She stared at it for a long time, then she typed, They're outside, both sides of the building, 2 men. The response came in 11 seconds. Faster than she'd expected, which told her he'd been awake, which told her he'd been waiting for exactly this. Don't open the door. Keep Sophie upstairs. I'm sending someone. She typed back, I told you no people. His response came in 4 seconds. They're already there. They've been there all week. You just didn't see them until now. Delilah read that message twice. He had put people on her building anyway, which meant he had been watching her while she was watching for Caruso's men, which meant she'd had no idea what was actually happening around her this entire time. She set the phone down on the counter and looked at the camera feeds on her app. The 2 men on the sidewalk, motionless, watching, and then at the stairs that led up to where her daughter slept, and then she looked at the message again. They've been there all week. You just didn't see them until now. The front door opened. Not the bell? Just the door, because it wasn't locked properly, because she'd been distracted with the cameras and had forgotten, and now it was opening and she grabbed the counter and spun around, and the man who came through it was young, dark-suited, Latino, and he held both hands up immediately and said, Ms. Hart, Mr. Moretti sent me. Get out. Her voice was a blade. Get out right now. Ms. Hart, I said, get out of my cafe. He held his position, hands still raised. There are 4 men outside. She stopped. Caruso's, he said, 2 on each side. They weren't there an hour ago. He lowered his hands slightly, slowly, the way you moved around something that might bolt. Mr. Moretti is 10 minutes away. He asked me to stay with you until... Footsteps on the stairs. Sophie stood at the bottom in her pajamas, hair everywhere, one sock half off, blinking at the stranger in the cafe with the sleepy, confused focus of a child recently woken, and Delilah crossed the room in 3 steps and put herself between her daughter and the man at the door and felt her heart doing something complicated and painful in her chest. Mom? Sophie's voice was small. What's happening? And Delilah opened her mouth to say nothing. Go back to bed. Everything's fine. The sentence she had assembled and deployed 100 times over 8 years, and found that the sentence dissolved somewhere between her brain and her mouth, and what came out instead was nothing, just silence. And Sophie stood at the bottom of the stairs in her half-off sock, looking between her mother and the stranger with the particular sharp attention she had, that way of reading a room that she'd inherited from nobody Delilah could account for. And Delilah thought, she knows something is wrong. She's known something was wrong for days, and I've been managing her out of the truth, and now it's standing in our cafe with its hands up, and there's no version of this she can't see. Go back upstairs, Delilah said. Quietly. Not a request. Mom. Sophie. She held her daughter's gaze. Upstairs. Lock your door. Put your headphones on. Sophie looked at the man by the door one more time. Then she looked at her mother's face. Whatever she saw there made her go. No argument, just the sound of small feet on stairs, and then the creak of her door, and then the click of the lock. Delilah turned back to the man. Your name, she said. Raphael. Raphael, you have until Dominic gets here to convince me you're not the worst thing that's happened to me this week. Start talking. What Raphael told her in the next 9 minutes was not organized or clean. It came out in pieces, the way information came from someone who was trained to give only what was necessary and was currently recalculating what necessary meant. Caruso had been watching the cafe since before Dominic's first visit. Not because of Delilah specifically, not at first, because of the building. Because 2 floors above the cafe, a man named Greer had been running a specific kind of money through a dry cleaning operation that wasn't actually a dry cleaning operation. And the building was a landmark in a network Caruso wanted access to. And the cafe was in the building, and Delilah was in the cafe. Then Dominic had walked through the door. And Caruso, who had people watching because Caruso always had people watching, had seen it. Had seen Dominic come back. Had started running her name through every channel he had access to. And had found, not Sophie, not yet, but the cafe, the address, the lease in her name, and the small detail of a school pickup schedule that repeated with the clockwork regularity of a single working parent who had no one to vary the routine. He was going to move on the building anyway, Raphael said. Dominic became the reason to move faster. What does move on the building mean? Delilah said. Raphael looked at his shoes. Pressure. On the owner. To change the lease arrangements. To get me out. Or to get access to the space. For... He stopped. For whatever Caruso needs space for. She heard her own voice. Flat. Controlled. A surface with nothing beneath it, because if anything got beneath it right now, she was going to lose the thread entirely. So I was collateral before I was a target. Yes. And then Dominic walked in and made me a target. Raphael said nothing, which was its own answer. The bell above the door had been disconnected from anything Delilah felt when it rang at 10:58 that night. It was just a sound. Dominic came through the door and his eyes found her immediately. Not Raphael, her. And he took in her face, and whatever he read there made him stop just inside the threshold. How many? He said to Raphael. 4 confirmed. Northeast, southwest, and 2 mobile. They're not moving yet. Dominic nodded once, looked at Delilah. She looked back at him. You put people on my building, she said. Yes. After I told you not to. Yes. The honesty of it. No deflection, no justification. Used up the particular anger she'd been preparing to spend on him and left her standing with something more complicated and less useful. Sophie's upstairs, she said. I know. Tell me what we're doing. He crossed to the counter, pulled out his phone, looked at something on it, put it away. We move you tonight, you and Sophie. Somewhere Caruso's people can't walk up to from the street. I'm not leaving my cafe. Delilah. I said I'm not leaving. She put both palms on the counter. This is mine. Everything I have is in this building. I'm not walking out and leaving it to Caruso or to anyone else. It's a building. It's my life. The words came out harder than she intended, scraping something raw. It's Sophie's life. It's the only stable thing she's ever had. And I'm not. She stopped, took a breath. Tell me another option. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Raphael and something passed between them, some kind of silent communication she wasn't part of. And Raphael moved toward the back of the cafe. There's a conversation we need to have, Dominic said. We're having it. Not here. His eyes moved to the ceiling, to the floor above where Sophie was, and back to her face. Not with her upstairs. She's locked in her room. Delilah. His voice had shifted. Not harder. Something worse than harder. Careful. The way a voice got when it was managing its own weight. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without... He stopped. Without what? Without doing what I think you're going to do when you hear it. Her hands pressed flat against the counter until the edge bit in. Say it. He pulled out his phone, opened something on it, set it on the counter facing her. It was a photograph. Not the cafe this time. A hospital record, partial, clearly obtained through channels that weren't official, the header cut off but the date visible. 8 years and 9 months ago. Patient name, Delilah Hart. Admitting reason, labor and delivery. Beneath it, a second image, a birth certificate. Sophie May Hart. Father, unknown. She looked at the documents and then at him. Where did you get these? She said. Caruso pulled them. He sent them to me tonight, an hour ago. His voice stayed level with visible effort. He was building a profile of everyone connected to me. He went back. He found the timing. He paused. Delilah, the math isn't complicated. She said nothing. She's mine, he said. And the way he said it, not a question, barely even a statement, more like a man saying something he'd already known for days and was only now allowing out of his mouth, cracked something open in the room that couldn't be closed again. Delilah stood very still. Say something, he said. No. Delilah, I said no. The word came out wrong, too small for what she was feeling, so she tried again. You don't get to walk in here with a document and claim, is she mine? The question was quiet, absolute. She looked at him, at the scar below his ear, at the jaw that Sophie had and that Delilah had spent 8 years not looking at directly in her daughter's face, at the eyes that were Sophie's eyes. She'd always known it. She'd known it every single day, and she had built a life around not knowing it, around the productive and necessary fiction that Sophie was entirely hers, that the father-shaped space in their life was empty rather than deliberately vacated. Yes, she said. The word hit the air between them and changed everything it touched. He didn't speak for a long time, long enough that Raphael came back from the rear of the cafe and read the room immediately and retreated again without a word. Long enough that somewhere above them a floorboard creaked. Sophie shifting in her bed or getting up for water, just the ordinary sounds of a child existing. And the sound of it went through Dominic's face like a current. How long have you known I was in the city? He said finally. I didn't. Not until you walked through the door. You never looked for me. Why would I look for someone who left without a word? She heard the acid in her own voice and didn't moderate it. You were gone. I found out I was pregnant 6 weeks later. You were gone. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I know that now. I didn't know it then. She moved around the counter, needing the distance, needing something between her hands and the stillness of standing. I was 22 and alone, and I had a choice between falling apart and not falling apart. I chose not. And Sophie is who she is because of that choice. She's not, her voice caught, just once, and she controlled it. She's not a consequence of your absence. She's the best thing I've ever done, and she has nothing to do with you. She has half her biology from me. Biology isn't a claim. I'm not making a claim. Then what are you making? He put his hands on the counter, looked at them. I don't know yet, he said, and the honesty of it, again, that undefended plainness, was harder to be angry at than any argument would have been. I don't know what I'm making. I just needed you to confirm it. And now I have. And now you have. They stood on opposite sides of the counter in the empty cafe with the camera feed still running on her phone and four of Caruso's men outside and a child upstairs who had her mother's stubbornness in her father's eyes. And Delilah felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been bracing for impact for so long that when it finally comes, it's almost a relief. "What does Caruso know?" she said. Dominic looked up. "He suspects. He's not confirmed. The documents he sent me are the same thing I just showed you. They're circumstantial. He's guessing." "What does he do when he stops guessing?" A pause. "He escalates." Define escalate. "He stops watching and starts moving." She nodded, processed. "So what we need is for him to remain uncertain, or for me to remove him from the equation before he gets there. How long does that take?" His jaw shifted. "Longer than we have." She thought about that. "What if he confirmed it?" she said. He went still. "What if Caruso confirmed that Sophie isn't yours?" she said slowly, thinking it through as she spoke, the logic assembling itself out of desperation and the particular clarity that came from having run out of other options. "If there was a way to convince him that his read was wrong, that you walked into this cafe because—" She searched. "Because the building, because Greer, upstairs, because you had your own business here that had nothing to do with me. He's been watching for 2 weeks. He's seen me come in. He's seen a man get coffee." She moved closer. "Dominic, he doesn't know what he saw. He's inferring. If we give him something else to infer—" "You're talking about a play," he said. "I'm talking about buying time." He studied her. "What kind of play?" She thought about it. About how it would look from the street. About the camera angles, the sight lines, the interpretable choreography of two people in a cafe. "You come in tomorrow morning," she said. "Business hours. You meet with someone about the building, about Greer. You make it look like that's what you've been here for all along. An arrangement, property. Nothing personal. Caruso has people who can pull financial records. Then make sure there's something in the records to pull." She watched his face. "You can do that." "Yes." "Then do it. Give him a narrative that puts me out of the picture." She paused. "And keep Sophie's name out of everything, whatever it takes." He looked at her for a long time. Something moved through his expression that she didn't have a name for, or had a name for, and wasn't going to use. "All right," he said. She nodded, moved back to the far counter, picked up her phone and looked at the camera feeds. The men outside were still there, still motionless, dark shapes at the edge of the frame. "You should go," she said. "I'm not leaving you here with— Raphael is here. Your other people are outside. And me being alone is the whole point of the story we're telling." She glanced at him. "You coming and going is fine. Like, you staying is a different signal." He held her gaze. Then he picked up his coat from the stool and put it on and moved toward the door. "Dominic." He stopped. "If this doesn't work, it'll work. If it doesn't, if Caruso moves faster than the play does, I need to know you'll—" She stopped, reconstructed. "I need to know Sophie is the priority." He turned around. His face was doing something complicated. "She's been the priority since you confirmed it," he said. "That's not going to change." She nodded. He left. She stood in the cafe and listened to the bell and then the silence, and then she went upstairs to check on Sophie. The play fell apart in 48 hours. Not because the execution was wrong. Dominic came the next morning with a man she didn't know, sat in the back booth, spread papers across the table, made it look exactly like a real estate negotiation because it was real enough to survive surface scrutiny. She kept her distance. She sent coffee to the table without eye contact. She played the part of the indifferent small business owner being mildly inconvenienced by strangers using her space. It fell apart because of Marcus. She found out on Thursday, at 2:17 in the afternoon, when a car she recognized from the camera feeds, a dark blue sedan she'd been tracking for days, rotating plates but the same vehicle, she was certain, parked on the northeast corner and Marcus got out of it. Marcus, who had slept on her couch 3 nights this week, who had her alarm codes and her spare key, and who Sophie called Uncle Mark and who Delilah had trusted without question for 11 years because some people you simply trusted, and Marcus had been one of those people, had been one of her people since before Sophie was born. She stood at the window and watched him cross the street and get back into a second car that she'd never seen before, and the car drove away, and she stood there for a very long time. Her phone was in her hand. She didn't know how it got there. She pulled up the camera footage, went back 4 days, and found it. 2 nights ago, 2:30 in the morning, the west interior camera, the angle that covered the door to the kitchen. Marcus, moving through the cafe after she'd gone upstairs, stopping at the counter, taking out his phone, photographing something. She zoomed in until the image degraded. On the counter, her notepad, the one where she'd written 2 days ago, the times of Sophie's school schedule, her pickup arrangements for the next week, the name of Sophie's teacher. Administrative things. Things she'd written down because she was a person managing 100 details simultaneously, and sometimes she needed to write them down. Marcus had photographed all of it. Then she scrolled back further. 5 days. Found Marcus at the door at 1 a.m., holding it open for 30 seconds before it swung shut. Long enough for someone outside to see the interior layout. Long enough to give someone a sense of the space. Long enough to do whatever Caruso had needed someone on the inside to do. She sat down on the floor behind the counter, not because she planned to. Her legs simply made the decision independently. She sat on the cold tile floor with her phone in both hands and stared at the footage and tried to assemble what it meant from the wreckage of what she'd believed, and what she found on the other side of that assembly was a picture so much worse than anything she'd prepared for. Marcus hadn't been protecting her. Marcus had been reporting on her. How long? That was the first question. How long had he been reporting, and to whom, and what had he given them? And did they already have everything they needed? And if they already had everything they needed, then the play with the property documents meant nothing, because Caruso already knew, had known before Dominic walked in on Tuesday, had possibly been waiting for confirmation of something he'd already been told by a man sleeping on her couch. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Marcus. She let it ring, watched the screen. It stopped, started again. She answered. Hey, he said. Like nothing. Like a Tuesday morning. Like 11 years. How are you holding up? She said nothing. A beat. Del? I saw the footage, she said. Silence. Marcus. Her voice came out even. She was distantly impressed. I have cameras. I put them up last week. I saw you at the counter. I saw you at the door. She paused. How long? The silence stretched until she could hear him breathing. Del, how long? 3 weeks. His voice had changed. Something stripped out of it. Before Moretti ever walked in, Caruso came to me 3 weeks ago. He knew we were friends. He said it was just surveillance, that nobody was going to get hurt. He knew we were friends, she repeated. How did he know that? I don't... He had a file. On you. He already had a file. He knew everything. He knew everything? She pressed her palm flat against the tile floor. Marcus? What did you tell him? Just the schedule, just the layout. He said he needed to understand the building, not... Did you tell him about Sophie? Del Sul? Did you tell him about Sophie? A silence that was its own answer. She ended the call. She sat on the floor for 12 more seconds. Then she stood, very carefully, the way you stood when you were not entirely certain your body was still taking direction from you, and she picked up her phone and called Dominic. He answered in 2 rings. The play is dead, she said. Caruso already knows. He's had someone inside for 3 weeks, my inside. She listened to the silence on his end and hated it and kept going. He knows Sophie's schedule. He knows her school. He knows her teacher's name. Her voice cracked on the last word, just barely, and she sealed it back shut. He's had everything for 3 weeks, Dominic. Everything we did in the last 48 hours, the documents, the narrative. I know, he said. She stopped. What? I found out an hour ago. I was on my way to tell you. His voice was controlled in the way that meant it was controlled deliberately. Caruso called me. He's done waiting. What did he say? He said I have until tomorrow night to sign over the Eastern Waterfront arrangement. A pause, brief and dense. Or he takes something in exchange. The cafe was very quiet. He said that, she said, specifically. He said, send me the paperwork or I'll collect what you owe me a different way. And then he sent me this. Her phone buzzed, a notification from Dominic. She pulled it up and looked at it, and the cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the November floor beneath her. It was a photograph of Sophie. Today. After school. Coming around the corner of the block in her coat and her backpack, her head down, her hair catching the wind. Taken from close. Close enough that the person had been within 20 feet of her. Close enough to reach her. Close enough. Delilah looked at the photograph of her daughter for a long time. At the child who had her mother's stubbornness and the jaw of a man Delilah had spent 9 years trying not to think about, and who was coming around a corner right now not knowing she was in someone's... Delilah was already moving. She didn't decide to move. Her body made the decision before her brain caught up. The same animal reflex that had been running her since Sophie was born. That wiring that bypassed everything rational and went straight to the oldest part of her, the part that had exactly one function and executed it without consultation. She was through the kitchen and up the stairs in 8 seconds. Sophie's room was empty. The bed was made. Sophie always made her bed. She'd been doing it since she was 6. It was one of those things she'd decided mattered and had stuck to with characteristic stubbornness. And the backpack was gone, which meant she hadn't come home yet, which meant she was still somewhere between the school and the block, and the man who'd been close enough to reach her was still out there. Delilah grabbed her coat from the hook by the apartment door. Her keys. Her phone. She was back down the stairs in 4 seconds, and through the cafe and out the front door without stopping, and the cold hit her like a wall, and she was already running. Her phone was at her ear. Dominic picked up before it finished the first ring. She's not home yet, Delilah said. Running. The sidewalk was wet from an hour ago's rain, and her shoes weren't made for this, and she didn't care. She should be home. She gets out at 3:15 and it takes her 7 minutes, and it's been 20. Which route? Straight down the avenue. She doesn't deviate. I told her never to deviate. I've got 2 people on the avenue. I'm calling them right now. Keep moving. She ran. The cold got into her lungs and her chest burned, and she ran anyway, scanning every face she passed, every car moving too slowly at the curb, every doorway with shadow in it. The afternoon had gone gray and wet, and the street had that compressed winter quality where everything felt closer than it was, where the sounds, traffic, a bus sighing to a stop, someone's music from a window 3 floors up, came layered and distorted. She turned the corner at the avenue, and Sophie was there. Standing on the sidewalk half a block down, backpack on both shoulders, looking up at the scaffolding on a building under renovation with the particular absorbed attention she gave to things that interested her. Whole. Unharmed. Completely unaware that her mother had just run 6 blocks in street shoes with her heart trying to exit her body. Delilah stopped, made herself stop, put her hand against the building beside her and breathed. Then she walked the half block to her daughter. Mom? Sophie looked up, read her face the way she always did, that quick, precise assessment. What's wrong? Nothing. She put her hand on Sophie's shoulder, steered her. Come on, we're going home. You're out of breath. I needed air. You're wearing your cafe apron. Delilah looked down. She was. She'd run 6 blocks in her work apron. I forgot, she said. Let's go. Sophie went. She kept pace with her mother's speed without being told to. Another thing Delilah had spent years being grateful for, that the kid could read a situation even when she wasn't being given the full information. They made it back to the cafe in 4 minutes. Delilah locked the door behind them and went to the window and looked out at the street. Her phone buzzed. Dominic. She's with you? She typed, yes. His response? Good. Don't let her out again today. I'm 20 minutes out. She looked at Sophie, who had put her backpack on the counter and was watching her with those wide, dark eyes. What's happening? Sophie said. I need you to stay inside today. Mom. I know. I'll explain later. For right now, I need you to go upstairs and stay there and not open the door for anyone who isn't me. You're scaring me. Delilah crossed the cafe and crouched down. She still did this, even though Sophie was getting tall. This instinct to get down to her level, to make the conversation eye to eye, and took her daughter's face in both hands the way she hadn't done since Sophie was small enough to allow it without complaint. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. You're not in danger. I need you to trust me and do what I'm asking." Sophie looked at her for a long moment with that unsettling directness she'd always had. Then she nodded, picked up her backpack, went upstairs. Delilah straightened and turned to the front window and watched the street. Dominic came in 18 minutes, not 20, with Raphael and 2 other men she didn't know. She unlocked the door and locked it again behind them, and they stood in the middle of the cafe floor. The chairs still on some tables, the espresso machine cooling, the afternoon light going gray through the windows. And she looked at all of them and felt the particular quality of calm that came when you stopped having options, and the decision simplified to a single point. "Tell me what you know," she said. Dominic took his coat off. Underneath it, he was in a dark shirt, and his jaw was tight, and there was something different about the way he was holding himself. A deliberate containment, like a man managing pressure that had nowhere to go. Caruso moved his timeline up. He's not waiting until tomorrow night. He has a location. The warehouse is at Pier 41, East River. He wants the meeting there. "When?" "Tonight, 9 o'clock. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where he brings people and I don't bring enough of them." Raphael shifted by the door. Dominic glanced at him. "He's been planning this for longer than he told me on the phone. The waterfront arrangement is cover. He wants the Moretti network itself. He's been building to a takeover for 18 months. I'm the last obstacle." She processed this. "And Sophie?" "Insurance. If I come to the meeting, he has leverage in the room. If I don't come, he activates it." "Activates." She tasted the word. "He'll take her." "Yes." She nodded. Just once. Then, "What do you need?" He looked at her. "I need you to stay here with Sophie. Locked in. My people outside, full perimeter. You don't open the door for anyone until I call you." "That's your plan." "Delilah, that is your plan. You go to a meeting at a location Caruso chose on a timeline Caruso set, and I sit here and wait." She kept her voice level. "How many people does Caruso have at Pier 41? A beat. "Minimum 20. "And you?" He glanced at Raphael, back at her. "Enough." "That's not a number." "It's enough." She held his gaze. "You're going to get killed." "I've been in worse positions." "I'm not saying it as a prediction. I'm saying it as a fact. 20 men at a location he controls on a timeline he's set. He's not meeting you. He's executing you." She watched something move across his face and kept going. "And once you're gone, Sophie has no protection. Whatever arrangement your people currently have dies with the authority behind it. You understand that?" He was quiet. "So I'm coming," she said. "No." "Dominic, no." His voice came down hard on the word. "You're not trained. You don't have—" "I'm not going in. I'm going near." She moved to the counter, pulled out the notepad she'd been keeping since this started. The one Marcus hadn't photographed, the one she'd started keeping in her coat pocket after she found the footage, the one with the camera angles and the building addresses and the shift rotations she'd been mapping from the feeds. She put it on the counter. "I've been tracking Caruso's people for a week. I know which 2 came from the north side because they always take the same route. I know there's a staging area 2 blocks from here they've been using since last Thursday. I know his mobile units rotate every 3 hours and the next rotation is at 8:45. She looked up. 15 minutes before your meeting. 15 minutes where his perimeter coverage is moving. Dominic looked at the notepad. At her. At the notepad again. "You've been tracking them," he said. "Someone had to." Raphael made a sound she couldn't interpret. "There's a service road behind Pier 41, she said. "I pulled the city infrastructure maps last week. It's not on the current navigation system. It was built for the renovation project in 2019, and it's not on any public map I could find, which means Caruso's people likely don't know it exists." She tapped the notepad. "If your people can approach from that angle during the rotation gap, you're not walking into a room with 20 guns. You're walking into a room with whatever he has inside and whatever he hasn't moved to the perimeter yet." The cafe was very quiet. "How did you get the infrastructure maps?" Dominic said. The city has a public records portal. You just have to know what to request. She looked at him. Do you want the plan, or do you want to be impressed that I have one? Something shifted in his face. Not softness. Nothing soft about this man. She'd understood that since Tuesday, maybe since longer ago than that. But something that acknowledged her, that looked at her fully, without managing or protecting or deciding what she needed to be shielded from. Show me, he said. They spent 40 minutes on the plan. Raphael pulled up satellite images on his phone and cross-referenced against what Delilah had on her notepad, and the two of them, Raphael with his tactical knowledge and Delilah with a week of obsessive observation, built something that Dominic moved through like a man stress-testing architecture, pushing at every joint to find where it would give. It held. By 7, Sophie had come downstairs, hunger winning over instruction, and Delilah had made her eat at the kitchen table upstairs, away from the men in the cafe, a meal that neither of them did justice to. Sophie ate half a grilled cheese and pushed the rest around the plate and looked at her mother with those eyes. Tell me what's happening, she said. Not yet. When? Soon. Delilah reached across the table and took Sophie's hand, the small crescent birthmark on the inside of her wrist. She'd looked at it so many times over 8 years and made it mean nothing, and now it meant something she hadn't finished adjusting to yet. I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to go to your room and pack a bag. Clothes, your books, your charger, like you're going on a trip. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Are we leaving? Maybe. Just pack the bag. Where are we going? I don't know yet. She squeezed her daughter's hand. But wherever it is, we'll go together. Okay? Sophie looked at her hand in Delilah's, then at her mother's face. Is the man going to help us? Which man? The tall one. The one who was outside. Sophie said it without inflection, the way children stated things they'd been thinking about quietly for days. He's downstairs, isn't he? I heard his voice. Delilah didn't answer immediately. He has the same thing on his wrist as me, Sophie said. That brown mark. I saw it when he put his hands on the counter. She looked at Delilah with the steady gaze of a child who was not asking the question she was actually asking. Is he going to help? Delilah's chest did the thing it did. The complicated, violent thing. Yes, she said. He's going to help. Sophie nodded, finished her milk, got up and went to pack her bag without another word, which was its own kind of grace. At 8:15, Delilah came downstairs. Dominic was alone in the cafe. Raphael and the others had already moved to their positions. The cafe was dark except for the counter lights, and it felt different in the dark, like a stage after everyone had cleared it, all the dailiness of it stripped away. He looked up when she came in. Sophie's upstairs, she said. She knows to stay. He nodded. There's something I need to say before you go. She stopped a few feet from him, not at the counter, just in the middle of the room. I'm not saying this because of tonight. I'm saying it because if I don't say it and something goes wrong, I'll have chosen not to say it, and I'm done choosing not to say things. She held his gaze. You left to protect me. I know that now. I didn't know it then. And not knowing it cost us both something that can't be recovered, and I'm not... She stopped. Restarted. I'm not forgiving you for it. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. But I know it wasn't nothing. What we had. I know it wasn't nothing, and I know you didn't leave because you wanted to. He was very still. That's all, she said. Now go end this. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the distance between them, not closing it entirely, just enough, and put one hand against the side of her face, briefly, the kind of touch that was a statement rather than a request. She let it happen. Then he dropped his hand and picked up his coat and went out the back. She stood in the middle of the dark cafe and breathed. Then she went to the camera feeds on her phone. The East River at 9 o'clock was a particular kind of ugly, the water black and indifferent, the docks smelling of diesel and the chemical bite of low tide, the shipping containers along Pier 41 arranged in long corridors that caught the wind and made it sound like something moving through the dark. Floodlights at intervals, sharp and industrial, throwing everything beyond their reach into deeper black. Delilah watched the feeds from the 2 cameras she'd asked Raphael to position that afternoon. External, limited angles, but enough to see the approach routes. She watched Dominic's people take the service road at 8:47 during the rotation gap, moving in groups of 3 with the particular economy of men who had done this before. She watched the east flank clear. She watched the staging area on her street. Still empty, the rotation not yet back. At 8:59, her phone lit up. Not Dominic, an unknown number. She answered. Ms. Hart. The voice was smooth and deliberate, and belonged to a man who enjoyed the fact of himself. I thought you should know your daughter is very polite. She opened the door for my man without much fuss at all. Delilah's blood stopped. She said her mother told her not to open the door for strangers. A pause. My man introduced himself by name, so technically they weren't strangers. Children are very literal, aren't they? She was moving before the sentence finished, up the stairs. The apartment door was closed. She hit it with her shoulder and it swung, and Sophie's room, empty. The window at the end of the hall, open, the fire escape. Delilah stood in her daughter's empty room with the phone at her ear and looked at the open window and felt everything she had been managing for 9 years come completely undone at once, and then, in the space of 3 seconds, come back together into something colder and sharper and entirely without mercy. Where is she? She said. Pier 41. The smooth voice hadn't changed. Which is where your Mr. Moretti is also heading, as it happens. Something of a reunion. A pause. Tell him to stand down, Ms. Hart. Tell him to walk away from the meeting and go home, and I'll send the girl back in a car. That's all this needs to be. You'll send her back. I'm a businessman, not a monster. Let me talk to her. A brief silence. Then Sophie's voice, tight, controlled, trying not to be frightened, and the trying broke Delilah's heart open clean. Mom, I'm okay. I'm okay. I know, baby. Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. I know you are. I'll see you soon. The smooth voice came back. You have 10 minutes to reach Moretti. After that, my patience has a variable I can't account for. The call ended. Delilah stood in Sophie's room for exactly 2 seconds. She looked at the open window, at the made bed, at the small bookshelf full of books arranged by color because Sophie had decided that was the right system. Then she grabbed her keys and her phone and went down the fire escape herself. She'd been to Pier 41 on the infrastructure maps enough times to know the layout. She'd studied it so carefully in the past 40 minutes that she could close her eyes and walk the service road in her head. She knew where the floodlights created blind spots. She knew where the containers were stacked 3 high and where they were only 2. She knew that the Eastern Service Corridor, the one nobody had bothered to put on a public map, fed directly to the main floor of the warehouse at the end of Pier 41. She ran, not toward the front approach, not toward Dominic's position or Caruso's perimeter or any of the places where men with guns were currently deciding how this night ended, toward the service road, the one nobody knew about except her. The river smell hit her at 3 blocks out, diesel and salt and cold, and the floodlights of the pier made the sky above it bright and false, and she could hear, at the edge of what was audible, the first sounds of something starting, a shout, cut off, and then a sound like a door hitting a wall, and then a sustained sound that she didn't let herself name, and she ran harder. At the mouth of the service road she stopped, pressed herself against the corrugated steel of the container to her left, looked around the edge. The eastern corridor was clear. She went. The service road was exactly what the maps had shown. A narrow gap between 2 rows of containers, unpaved, pooled with shallow water from the day's rain, lit only by the ambient glow of the pier lights above the container walls. She moved fast and low and tried not to think about what she was running toward. Tried to think instead about the layout, about where they would put a child to control her without letting her see too much, about which part of the warehouse offered the most cover from both sides, about Sophie, who was somewhere in this dark, being literal about strangers. She was 40 feet from the warehouse entrance when the explosion happened. Not large, a tactical device, something designed to disorient rather than destroy, and it came from the north side of the pier where Dominic's approach was. The floodlights on that side blew out. The light changed all at once, the pier going half dark, and in the new dark she heard shouting and running and the start of something that had clearly been coming for longer than tonight. She didn't stop. She reached the warehouse entrance. A loading door, rusted half open, the hydraulic mechanism long since failed, and went through sideways into the dark interior and stopped with her back against the interior wall, her breath sawing in and out, her eyes adjusting to the new darkness. The warehouse was vast and cold and smelled of rust and old water, stacked pallets, container frames, industrial debris from years of intermittent use, and across the floor, maybe 60 feet away, under a single working light suspended from the ceiling, Sophie, sitting on an overturned crate with her backpack still on. She'd had time to grab her bag. That detail hit Delilah somewhere that wasn't rational. And her arms around her knees, her face turned away. Alive. Whole. A man standing 8 feet from her with his back to Delilah. Delilah looked at the man, at the distance, at the pallets between her and Sophie, at the sounds from outside getting louder, getting closer, the running and the shouting moving toward the main warehouse doors on the opposite side. She did the math. 60 feet of open floor was too much. The pallets gave her 40 feet of covered movement. The last 20 feet between the end of the pallet row and Sophie's position were exposed. Nothing between her and the man except bad odds, and the noise from outside that might or might not cover her movement. She had nothing. No weapon. No training. Nothing but the 20 feet and the noise, and the fact that she was Sophie's mother, and there was not a calculation in the world that produced an outcome where she stood here. She moved. Not fast. Fast would make noise. She went low and she went steady, using the outside chaos as cover the way she'd calculated, each step placed with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that she had exactly one chance at this, and that one chance was all there was. The pallets were stacked 4 high on her left, casting deep shadows toward the floor, and she moved through those shadows the way you moved when you stopped thinking about yourself and thought only about the 60 feet ahead and the 8-year-old at the end of it. 40 feet. 30. The man by Sophie hadn't moved. He was watching the main doors on the far side of the warehouse where the noise was coming from. The shouting, the sounds of something physical and urgent being resolved in the dark. And his attention was fully committed to that direction. Fully committed meant partially blind. She'd spent a week learning to read sightlines from camera feeds, and she read this one without stopping. 20 feet, the exposed stretch, the last bad calculation. Sophie shifted on the crate. The man said something, low, sharp, stay still, and Sophie went still, and Delilah used the 2 seconds of his redirected attention to cover the last 20 feet in a dead run. She hit him from behind with everything she had, which wasn't technique and wasn't training, just mass and desperation and the specific ferocity of someone with nothing left to lose. They went down together onto the concrete floor, and the impact was brutal and indifferent. Her shoulder into the warehouse floor, his elbow into her ribs, the breath leaving her body all at once in a sound she couldn't control. He was bigger than her and faster than her, and in 3 seconds he had them reversed, his weight on top, and she felt what was in his hand before she saw it. "Mom, don't move." Her voice came out broken from the impact. She said it to Sophie. "Stay right there." The man above her was breathing hard. He had one forearm across her collarbone and the other hand free, and she could see his face now. Young, younger than she'd expected. A kid, really, barely past 20, doing a job that was going to cost him more than he currently understood. He looked at her with something that wasn't entirely without conflict. Then Sophie hit him across the back of the head with her backpack. The backpack contained, as Delilah knew from years of carrying it upstairs, approximately 4 library books, a lunchbox, a charger, and a water bottle. The water bottle was full. The combined weight was meaningful, and Sophie swung it with both hands and the full commitment of a child who had decided, and the man lurched forward and the forearm across Delilah's chest slipped, and she used the slip to twist, and her elbow found something that crunched, and he rolled, and she was up. She grabbed Sophie's hand. "Service road," she said, "behind me. Don't let go." They ran. They came out of the eastern corridor into the cold and the river smell, and Delilah's ribs were screaming, and she ran anyway because stopping was not a thing she was currently able to process. Sophie ran beside her, backpack bouncing, not asking questions, running because her mother was running, the two of them moving through the dark service road in lockstep until the sounds of the warehouse fell behind, and they reached the street. Delilah stopped at the corner of the service road, put her back against a wall, pulled Sophie in front of her and looked at her, all of her, quickly, the practiced maternal inventory that took 2 seconds and covered everything. And Sophie was whole and unhurt and furious in the specific way of a child who has been very frightened and is converting the fear into something more manageable. "The water bottle," Delilah said. "He was hurting you." "The water bottle," she said again, and something in her voice broke through its own surface, just briefly, and Sophie looked at her and the anger dropped into something younger and rawer. "Mom, you did good." She put both hands on Sophie's face. "You did so good." Sophie's chin moved. She was not going to cry. She was her mother's daughter. "What do we do now?" Delilah looked at the street, at the pier behind them, lit and loud, at her phone, which had 7 missed calls from Dominic and 1 from a number she didn't recognize and 1 from Raphael. She called Raphael. He picked up in 1 ring. "Where are you?" "Street side, east of the service road. Sophie's with me." She listened to the sounds behind his voice. It was quieter than she expected. "What's happening in there?" "It's over." His voice was flat, professional. "Mostly. You need to stay where you are." "What does mostly mean?" A pause. "Caruso's contained. His people either ran or they're down. There were more of ours than he planned for." Another pause. "Dominic took a hit. He's—" Her chest clenched. "Raphael. He's standing. He's asking for you." She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. "Where?" The inside of the warehouse looked different with the overhead floods on. Someone had found the breakers, and the harsh industrial light made everything flat and real and unavoidable. There were men down at the far end by the main doors. There were men standing who were clearly Dominic's, their posture different from the men who were down, a quality of competence still functional in them even in the aftermath. There was blood on the concrete in patterns she catalogued and moved past. Dominic was at the center of the warehouse floor, seated on the edge of a container pallet, and he was upright, which she confirmed before she let herself breathe. Raphael was right. He was standing, or close enough to standing to count. He had his hand pressed to his left side, and when he moved it to look at her, she saw the dark spread through his shirt and understood the mathematics of it. "Don't," he said, before she could speak. "You need a hospital." "In a minute." "Not in a minute. Now." She crossed to him. He didn't stop her. She put her hand over his, over the wound, and felt the warmth of it, and the reality of standing in a warehouse with her hand over a bullet wound in the father of her child hit her somewhere in the body rather than the mind, a physical impact she absorbed without comment. "Sophie?" Sophie had stopped a few feet back. She was looking at Dominic with the steady, focused gaze she gave to things she was deciding about. "She's okay?" he said, quietly. She hit a man in the head with a water bottle. Something moved across his face. "Did it work?" "He went down." His eyes went to Sophie. Sophie looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, and the silence between them had a quality Delilah couldn't name exactly. Not recognition, not yet, not the full weight of it, but something adjacent, the particular resonance of 2 people who shared something they hadn't yet been told. "Hey," Dominic said. Sophie looked at him steadily. "You're hurt." "I'm okay." "You're not okay. You're bleeding. It looks worse than it is." "That's what people say when it's exactly as bad as it looks." She shifted her backpack. "My mom should take you to the hospital." His eyes moved to Delilah. The corner of his mouth moved. "She's telling me." "She gets it from you," Delilah said, before she could stop herself. The warehouse was very quiet for a moment. Sophie looked between them with those eyes, processing, filing, coming to a conclusion she was going to hold until she decided what to do with it. "Let's go," she said, with the practical authority of someone who was done waiting for adults to act. "Both of you." Caruso was alive. This was the thing Delilah processed in the waiting room of the hospital, while a doctor she'd never met worked on Dominic's side, and Sophie slept in the chair beside her with her head on Delilah's shoulder. Raphael sat across from them and told her what had happened, quietly, in the compact, efficient way he communicated everything. Caruso had been at the warehouse. He'd brought more men than anticipated. Dominic's people had moved through the service road as planned. Delilah's plan, Raphael said, with a brief directness that she acknowledged and then set aside. And the element of surprise had closed the gap between the numbers. There had been a confrontation at the center of the warehouse floor between Dominic and Caruso, while Delilah was moving through the eastern corridor. During that confrontation, Caruso had told Dominic something that had apparently shifted the entire architecture of the night. Told him what? Delilah said. Raphael looked at his hands. The man who originally drove Dominic out, 9 years ago. The betrayal that started all of it. He paused. It was Caruso. He was the one who gave the information to Dominic's enemies back then. He set up the situation that forced Dominic to disappear. Delilah was quiet for a moment. Caruso had been running a play for 9 years, Raphael continued. He engineered the situation that removed Dominic from the city, spent 9 years building while Dominic was in exile. Tonight was supposed to be the conclusion of that. He looked up. Instead, it's a hospital waiting room. She thought about 9 years. About a 22-year-old girl finding out she was pregnant alone. About the specific architecture of a life built in the space where someone else's betrayal had created a vacancy. About all the ways a single act of treachery moved through time and became 1,000 other things. A cafe, a daughter, a routine of 40 minutes in the dark before sunrise, a rubber band on a bathroom faucet. What happens to him, she said. Caruso. Raphael's voice was even. He'll be handled. She didn't ask what that meant. She understood that there were mechanisms operating here that she wasn't part of and hadn't been part of and could choose to understand better or not. And tonight she was choosing not. Tonight she was choosing the waiting room and Sophie's weight against her shoulder and the particular exhaustion of a body that had run further than it was designed to run. And after, she said, after it's handled, what does Dominic do? Raphael was quiet for a moment. That's probably a conversation for him. I know. I'm asking you. He looked at her with something that might have been respect. He's been trying to get out for 2 years, before Caruso moved, before any of this. The Eastern Waterfront arrangement was the last piece of a structure he's been dismantling. He paused. That's what the fight was actually about. Caruso moved because he understood that if Dominic finished getting out, the window closed, so he forced the confrontation. She sat with that. He was already leaving, she said. He was already leaving, Raphael confirmed. She looked at Sophie sleeping, at the small crescent mark on her wrist, visible below the sleeve of her coat. She thought about a birth certificate that said father unknown, and about how that had been both a lie and the truest thing she'd known how to write at the time. She didn't know what came next. She understood that was okay. Sepumtit. The doctor came at 2:17 in the morning. The bullet had passed through cleanly. She used more precise language than that, but through cleanly was what Delilah retained. No organ involvement, blood loss manageable. He was awake and could have one visitor for 10 minutes. Raphael looked at Delilah. She looked at Sophie, still asleep. I'll stay with her, Raphael said. She went. The room was small and lit badly, and Dominic looked like a man who had spent the last several hours being exactly who he was, which was to say he looked exhausted and damaged and more present than she'd seen him look since he'd walked back into her life. He was sitting up, hospital gown instead of the dark shirt, the dressing on his side visible under it. His hands were on the blanket in front of him, and he turned them over when she came in, a gesture she didn't analyze. She sat in the chair beside the bed. They were quiet for a moment. The hospital had its own ambient sound, distant and institutional and utterly indifferent to the specific weight of what was in this room. She hit someone with a water bottle, he said. Full one. Smart. She packed her bag before they took her, Delilah said. She had time to pack a bag and she did it, because I told her to, because she trusts me even when I can't explain why. She looked at her hands. She's been trusting me to do the right thing her whole life, and I have tried very hard not to let her down. You didn't. Tonight I ran toward a warehouse. She met his eyes. With no weapon and no plan past get to her. That was the entire plan. It worked. It worked because she hit someone with a water bottle. She held his gaze. Dominic, I need to say something, and I need to say it clearly. Okay. She doesn't know yet what you are to her. I haven't told her, and I'm not going to tell her tonight. She watched his face. When I tell her, and I will tell her, I'm not going to build another 9 years on a withheld truth. It's going to be on her terms, at the right moment, in a way that she can absorb and ask questions about and be angry about if she needs to be angry. She paused. What I need to know is whether you can wait for that, whether you can let me manage the timing. He looked at her for a long moment. What does managing the timing look like? It looks like you being a person in her world before you're a fact in her history. She kept her voice even. She's already curious about you. She noticed the birthmark. She watched his expression. She's 8, and she's observant, and she's going to get there herself eventually. But she needs to get there at a pace she can handle. What do you need from me in the meantime? I need you to be careful with her. She attaches fast and she loves hard. And if you come into her life and then aren't there anymore, that'll cost her something I can't give back. She let that settle. So don't come in unless you're staying. That's the only condition. He looked at the blanket, at his hands, at her. I was already leaving everything else, he said. I've been leaving it for 2 years. Something moved through his face that was tired and real, and nothing like the man who had walked into her cafe in a $1,000 coat. I don't have anything to go back to except what I'm still dismantling. Give me 3 months. Let me finish it clean. And then, he stopped. And then what? And then I'd like to get coffee, he said, at your cafe, regularly. And maybe read whatever Sophie's reading, if she'll tell me. He held her gaze. That's all I'm asking for right now. I know that's not enough. I know there's no version of 9 years that gets paid back by a good answer in a hospital room. His voice stayed level. But that's what I have. Delilah looked at him for a long time. The coffee's $4, she said. I don't run a tab. Something in his face changed. Not a smile exactly, something quieter. Okay. And the chairs go on the tables at 9. I'm not staying open late for anyone. Understood. And Sophie recommends her own books. Don't pick one without asking her first. She has opinions. I gathered. She stood, picked up her coat from the back of the chair. 3 months, she said. Get it done. She looked at him one more time, not at the scar or the jaw or any of the things she'd been cataloging since Tuesday, just at the face itself, the whole of it, a man trying to navigate between what he'd been and what he was capable of becoming. Then come back. She left before he could say anything else. Check. Emptet. The cafe was closed for 2 days. She'd never closed it for 2 consecutive days since she opened it. She left a sign on the door, Family Matter, back Thursday. And she and Sophie stayed upstairs, and Delilah did something she almost never allowed herself, which was to do very little. She made soup. She watched 2 movies with Sophie on the couch. She let Sophie pick both of them, and she didn't comment on the choices. She slept for 9 hours on Wednesday night, which she hadn't done since before Sophie was born. On Thursday morning, she came downstairs at 4:13 and unlocked the cafe and put the chairs down and got the espresso machine running. Sophie came down at 7:30, dressed, backpack on, stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Mom, she said. The man, from the warehouse. She said it with her characteristic directness, the particular quality of a child who has decided to ask the thing directly rather than approach it sideways. Is he going to be okay? Delilah finished tamping the espresso grounds. Yes. Are we going to see him again? A pause. Eventually. Yes. Sophie absorbed this, adjusted the straps of her backpack. Good, she said, and the word carried more inside it than its single syllable suggested, a whole structure of 8-year-old reasoning that Delilah understood without needing it explained. School, Delilah said. I know. Sophie came around the counter and hugged her, abrupt, complete, the full commitment of a child who hadn't lost the habit of physical affection, and Delilah held on for a moment longer than usual, her nose against the top of Sophie's head, the smell of her daughter's shampoo. Love you. Love you more, Sophie said, pulling back, already heading for the door. The hot chocolate had too much milk yesterday. It was supposed to have milk. It's hot chocolate. More chocolate next time. We'll negotiate. Sophie went out the door and the bell rang, and Delilah listened to it fall back into silence and stood at the counter with her hands on the portafilter and the espresso machine warming and the early morning dark outside the window. The first customer came at 7:42. Mrs. Chen, green tea, half of which she wouldn't drink. The grad students at noon, the retired teacher who tipped 30% without fail. The lunch crowd, and the afternoon lull, and the last few regulars before close. She moved through all of it the way she'd been moving through it for years. The inventory, the transactions, the small practiced courtesies of a person running a counter. But something in the texture of it was different. The way a room was different after you'd rearranged the furniture. The same dimensions, but the light falling at new angles. Marcus did not come in. He wouldn't come in again. That was a wound she hadn't finished accounting for, the specific damage of a betrayal by someone you'd trusted without examination, and she understood it was going to take longer to process than a week or a month. The trust itself wasn't the thing that hurt most. The thing that hurt most was what his betrayal had required her to ask herself. How much of her certainty about the people in her life was examination, and how much was the comfortable momentum of having always believed it? She was still thinking about that on Thursday evening when she wiped down the counter and turned off the lights and locked the door. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looked at the window. At her name in the gold letters she'd put up herself, the H she'd had to redo. At the corner booth just visible through the glass. Then she went upstairs and made dinner. 3 months and 11 days after the night at the pier, Dominic Moretti walked into Hart's Corner at 10:15 on a Wednesday morning. Delilah saw him on the camera app before he reached the door. She put her phone face down on the counter and kept moving. The pastry case needed restocking. She had an order to put in before noon. And she didn't look up when the bell rang. "Coffee," he said. "I know what you want." She kept her back to him, reaching for the espresso. "Sit down." She heard the stool move, heard him settle. She made the coffee with the same attention she gave everything, the grind, the tamp, the pour, and set it on the counter in front of him and made herself meet his eyes without ceremony. He looked different, or not different, less fortified, less of whatever that coat and that stillness had been insulating. He was in a regular jacket, dark wool, nothing tailored about it. He had the beginning of something that might eventually become a beard. He looked like a man who had recently stopped being one kind of person and hadn't entirely figured out what kind came next. She thought she understood that. "How'd it finish?" she said. "Clean." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "The waterfront arrangement transferred last month. The last of the operational structure dissolved 3 weeks ago. There are 3 lawyers currently doing things I'm not involved in anymore." He paused. "It's done." She nodded. "Raphael is consulting for a logistics firm in the Bronx," he said. "Legitimate. He seems to like it." "And Caruso?" Dominic looked at the coffee. "There was a proceeding. He's in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. He'll be there for the remainder of his functional life." She absorbed this, turned back to the pastry case. "The chocolate croissants are gone," she said. "I can do a scone." "That's fine." She got the scone, set it on a small plate in front of him. He didn't eat it immediately, just looked at it. "I've been doing a thing," he said. "The past 3 months. I don't know if it's—" He stopped. "I've been trying to figure out what I'm good at, aside from the obvious things I'm not doing anymore." "What did you come up with?" "Possibly nothing useful yet." The corner of his mouth moved. "I'm taking my time with it." She almost said something dry about that, but let it go. The cafe had its mid-morning quiet, just the two of them, and the sound of the street outside and the espresso machine doing its patient thermal work. "She gets out at 3:15, Delilah said. She kept her voice even and her eyes on the counter. "She comes straight here. She does her reading in the corner booth before she does homework." A pause. "Wednesdays she has a lot to say because Tuesdays are the days her class does silent reading and she saves it all up." He was very still. "She knows about the birthmark," Delilah said. "I told you, she made the connection herself." She finally looked at him. "I haven't told her the full truth yet. I'm going to. Soon." She held his gaze. "But you being here when she comes in is a conversation. You understand that." "I understand." If she asks you something directly, don't lie to her. She'll know. Delilah paused. She always knows. He looked at her. You told me she gets it from me. I said that because I wasn't thinking. You said it because it's true. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to the counter, picked up the cloth she used for wiping down the machine. Put it back down. $4.50, she said. Coffee and scone. He slid a 10 across the counter. I don't have change for that. Keep it. I don't want your... It's not a tip, he said. It's a regular customer paying for his coffee. That's all. She looked at the 10 on the counter. She picked it up, put it in the register, made change and put the change on the counter because she had the only argument left that mattered, which was that this was her counter and her register and her cafe, and she ran it on her terms. He left the change. She left it there too. At 3:18, the bell above the door rang, and Sophie came through it with her backpack on both shoulders and her hair escaping from whatever she'd tried to do with it that morning, and her mouth already open before she'd cleared the threshold. She stopped when she saw Dominic on the stool. The two of them looked at each other. Sophie shifted her backpack, looked at her mother, looked back at Dominic. You got better, she said. I did. Your jacket is different. The other one had a hole in it. Sophie considered this with the gravity she brought to most things, then came around to her corner booth and put her backpack down and began the process of extracting her current book from beneath the weight of her other belongings. She found it, a thick novel with a cracked spine that Delilah had bought her at the second-hand bookshop on 9th, and settled in with the particular satisfaction of someone taking possession of a space that was theirs. Then she looked at Dominic again. That's my booth, she said. Not territorial, just informational. I can see that. You can come look at the pictures on the cover if you want. There are no pictures, but you can look at it. Dominic looked at Delilah. Something in his face that she was not going to interpret right now. He picked up his coffee and moved to the booth and sat across from Sophie, and Sophie showed him the cover of the book with the seriousness of a person conducting a presentation, and Delilah turned back to the counter. Outside, through the window, the late afternoon light was doing the thing it did in November, going golden and low and very briefly before the dark came in, making everything it touched look like something worth keeping. She watched the street for a moment, the ordinary movement of it, people walking, someone with a dog, the grocery across the way with its lights coming on against the dusk. Then she heard Sophie's voice from the corner booth, explaining something about the plot, the particular accelerating cadence of a child with a captive audience and a lot of saved-up Tuesday, and beneath it, quieter, a response she couldn't make out. She didn't need to make it out. She turned back to her counter, to the portafilter and the cloth and the pastry case that needed restocking and the order she still hadn't put in, to the small mechanical particulars of a life she had built one early morning at a time, in the dark, before the rest of the world woke up, out of materials that hadn't always cooperated. She picked up the cloth. She got back to work.